I was recently asked, knowing what I know now, if I was to retire tomorrow, would I still pick Dumaguete, Philippines to move to? I'm going to tell you what my answer was to that question in the upcoming video. So the genesis, or rather the inspiration for this video, came from a conversation I had about 7 or 8 days ago with a 72-year-old gentleman from St. Louis who for the last year and a half has been traveling throughout Southeast Asia. And I hope I don't forget him, but prior to coming here to Dumaguete, he has visited Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand. And now he's here in sleepy little Dumaguete. And he's trying to find which country is the best match for him and his lifestyle. Budgetary issues are not a problem for him. I just thought I'd throw that in there. But it is a big factor for other people, including yours truly. So, he asked me a question after we talked for about 30 minutes about the good, the bad, the ugly of all the different countries. Some I had experienced, some I hadn't. He was more traveled than I. He said, let me ask you a question, Paul. He said, if you had it to do all over again, like you did 8 years ago, and you were me, and you were looking online, and you were watching YouTube videos and anything else you could get your hands on, would you still pick Dumaguete? And I didn't have an answer for him. I said, can I get back to you on that? And I did get back with him. We did get together again, and I told him exactly why and what I chose and why I did, and how I think it would be almost impossible to duplicate what happened to me in 2017 today in 2025. So I guess we'll take a little walk down memory lane. 2017. How can any of us forget that's watched YouTube for any length of time about the Philippines? But I'm going to stay with Dumaguete. That you can live like a king for $1,000 a month. Well, today I would say you can take the king out of it, and the $1,000 a month in 2017, still keeping the king out of it, was doable. And not only was it doable, but it was comfortable. Now, there were 3 guys that I watched on YouTube at that time, and that was Rike, Life Beyond the Sea, Ned with Philippine Dreams, and Bud Brown with the Bud Brown Show. And so those guys every month did a video about their budget. I loved it. I would wait for it. I would salivate for it. And all those 3 guys in 2017 and prior were living on $1,000 a month. End of story. They would come out with these spreadsheets and they would show this much for rent, this much for food, this much for electricity, water, food. And that was that. So that was a realism in 2017. I spent a little more than that because I got a little fancier apartment, just because it was available and the landlord was right, the terms was right, and it only had 1 other apartment on it. So not only did I have a real modern place to live with a pool, but I only had 1 neighbor, and it was just this cool 40-year-old retired Marine named Sam. And him and I got along great. Okay, so what was life like in 2017? I did my best on researching this to find out what the population of American expats was in 2017 in Dumaguete. The best I could get using 4 different sources was somewhere between 300 and 1,000 guys that looked like me. Excuse me. And I would say that number is right on. In fact, probably towards the 500 mark. We'll split the difference. 650 is probably splitting the difference. But it was 500-600 guys, I would say, in Dumaguete. Because Dumaguete at that time was actually a lot smaller in size as far as infrastructure and buildings. So one thing that struck me right between the eyes, after I got settled in and started driving my scooter around, And even before that, when I drove down the street, when they would see me with my white face and my white hair, I stuck out like a sore thumb, little kids would stop and stare at me. And it was with curiosity. Same thing for the adults, men, women, all shapes, all sizes, all age brackets. Not all the time, but often enough that they would stop and look at me with just this curiosity, like, what is that? It was like an alien had landed and jumped out of a spaceship almost. And I would always smile at them, and they would always smile right back. And if I waved, they'd wave right back. And so I said, man, this is like Disneyland. This is the friendliest place on earth. And so I'd be bugging around. And the same thing happened when I was on foot. If I was walking through the mall, we had one mall back then. Now there's three that I know of, maybe four. Same deal. Get the looks from people. The female population back then, the 20s, the 30-year-olds, they would always look at you. Not always, but most of the time look at you. And some would be rather flirtatious in that little glance or look or smile. And so there was very rarely a lonely foreigner here in the Philippines. And I would sit for hours sometimes. The structure of the mall was totally different back then. It's been torn down and redone. But there was a coffee shop right at the entrance. And I would sit and I would buy a cup of coffee and drink it. And I'd just people watch for hours on end. And I would always see these big fat foreigners, guys like me, big ugly guys with these cute little Filipinas and their little mini skirts and high heels, just hanging on to them for dear life. And it was like, wow, how'd that guy meet her? You never see this back home in America. And so that was one of the dynamics that was really prevalent in 2017, is that being a guy, a white guy or a black guy, and being a foreigner was something that the local population really elicited a lot of curiosity from them. And they were very curious about you. And they would, if you did engage in a conversation with them, they always wanted to know the same thing. Where were you from? How old are you? And the females would, so fast, are you married? Do you have a girlfriend? And if you said no, they'd say, you sure? And I go, yeah, I'm sure. I'm a single guy. And I even had a doctor ask me that one time. I went in for a checkup. I thought I was having some sort of issue with my heart. About the fourth week I was here, I took a trike and I went to an emergency room, and a 50-year-old female doctor was there. And they hooked me up with the EKG and all that kind of stuff. Turned out that it was nothing. I was just dehydrated, and my heart elevated a little bit, and I was real flush. It had been real hot. So they got me all cooled off with liquid. I think they put an IV in me for a while, popped it out, and that was that. And as I was checking out with the doctor, a 50-year-old female, she said, okay, so you're this old, I think, 62, and you're this, and where do you live? And I said, I live in Valencia. And she goes, and you're how old? It was all right there. And I said, I'm 62. And she said, are you single? 50-year-old doctor. I'll never forget that. So that was kind of the ebb and flow. As far as money goes, oh boy, it was a lot cheaper back then than it is today. The $1,000 a month deal was doable. You could eat for a breakfast, for American breakfast, for a couple, $3. If you were a smoker, you could buy a pack of cigarettes for $1. If you were a drinker, you could buy an ice cold beer for 30 pesos. And on and on and on it goes. So that's 2017. That's pretty much 2018. 2019, I started to notice one big change, and that was the traffic. It had been a scooter town since day one. I mean, when I got here, you saw there was always trucks. Those are big trucks. They're delivery trucks. They're going to be on the road. You expect those. But as far as passenger vehicles, they were far and few between. And if there was one out there, it was a 15-year-old beater that somebody was just buzzing down in. After 2 years, there was this massive explosion of new cars on the road. And, everyone wants to blame the expats. Remember, expat community was maybe up at 1,500, 2,000 by then, I would say, as a number count. We weren't all buying new cars. I didn't. I had a scooter for 5 years. It was the Filipinos who were buying all these brand new cars. Now, with my work history, I said to myself, okay, this smells an awful lot like a special financing situation. I've seen this happen in America. And yes, for once, I was 100% correct. The automotive industry out here, along with the banks, had decided they were going to loosen things up for the locals, get them good and buried in debt at 36% interest. And all they had to do was cough up something like, I'll say 30 or 40,000 pesos, $600, $700, $800 to you and me. And that was the down payment all in. And then they got to make, the friendly, easy monthly payments at X amount per month. And so where did they get the 30 or 40,000 pesos? Well, the middle class people had it, so they would just jump on it. The lower case people would do it as a family. This guy would kick in 10, this guy would kick in 10, that guy would kick in 10 grand, and off they went in their new car. Nobody had a driver's license. Nobody had a driving license. Nobody knew what the hell they were doing, but they got behind that car and proceeded to this day to terrorize everybody. You don't believe me? Try to watch my wife drive someday. Anyway, so that was kind of a thing that started to disappoint me in 2019, was I saw this influx of cars. And at that point, it wasn't so bad that it was jamming up the roads to something terrible, but it actually kind of saddened me that these nice Filipinos were being indebted. They were going into debt. They were taking on these payments that I knew they couldn't afford. I was in the business. I know that they were in over their head. And the credit check out here doesn't exist. They only asked these people, where do you live? They went out to where they lived. They took a picture of it, of where their residence was, because a lot of it's just down some dirt road somewhere, and there's no addresses. And as you may have suspected, the repossession rate to this day is over 50%. So they get the people to sign up, they get their down payment, they get 2 or 3 payments out of them at 30 to 36% interest. They miss a payment, they pop the car, they bring it back to the bank, and they do their whole thing all over again. They're really not selling a car, they're selling an interest contract. That's where the real money is being made. But I won't belabor that. Okay, so that was one of the changes that I saw. More and more guys were moving into Dumaguete. And for the most part, they were just really nice guys. You're always going to get an egg that's rotten. You're always going to get a guy that's too loud, too aggressive, too boisterous, rude, or obnoxious. And I was always cool with it if they were rude, obnoxious, loud, and whatever with me. But it really took it to my heart and anybody else. And we all mentioned this as we'd have our little group chats every now and then, about some prick going into a restaurant and berating the waitress or the server because their little pizza didn't come out just perfect, or it took too long, or the order was wrong. You're in a different country, man, and you came here for a change. So I always say, try to change with them, adapt and accept and learn, go with the flow. All right, I know it's not right, but just don't go back again. And not once have I ever sent food back. Have I sat through that? Countless times. They get the order wrong, or the food tastes like hell. And back then, the choices were very, very few. there was 3, maybe 4, what I would call expat-friendly resto bars. And primarily, you go there and drink and watch football games on the TV, and you could get a burger and some Americanized or Westernized type of food, and it was never really top-notch. You always had your good old standbys like McDonald's or something if you wanted a taste of home. Kentucky Fried Chicken. That was always available. All right, so that's kind of the dynamic when I first moved here. And it was still just cheap as hell. I lived on about $1,500 a month, but I lived what I thought was kind of a high life. I would go out at night. I had 2 or 3 Filipino friends that I would drag them along with me, or they'd invite me out, and I would play sponsor. I was well aware of the fact that I was the sponsor, and that's why I was included. And so we go out, and the girls would drink, and I would drink, and it would cost me $20-25. And I didn't do it every night, but that was entertainment to me. That got old after a while. I got tired of drinking. I've never been a big drinker. But when I came over here, it was almost like I was reliving my childhood. So I was kind of going through this sophomoric attitude with, the looks and with the attention and the extra money in my pocket and not having to worry about my overhead or will I have a roof over my head. My check was going to come in every month, whether I wanted it to or not. And so life was good. And it was easy to make friends, and it was easy to, if you liked the guy, you'd had him over. I don't know how many gatherings I had at that apartment of mine, and I don't know how many others I went to, but everybody had a girlfriend except me for a while there. And so it was just a good time was had by all, and we couldn't get enough of it. We did get a little worn out on the lack of availability of goods and services. The service out here has never been great. The in-stock stuff has never always been perfect. But again, to me, those aren't deal breakers. But really what's become an issue, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll come back to that. All right, so now we're all moving and grooving. Everybody's having a good time. I'm single for the first 2 years that I'm here, and right around there, 2019, was when I started this nonsense, a little YouTube channel, and started doing that for fun. I once asked Bud Brown, I said, hey man, do you ever make any money on this? And Monty Crew, who helped me set it up. And they said, yeah, if you get going, you can probably make a couple $100 a month on this now. And that's the God's truth, once you get monetized. And I said, well, extra $200, that would work. And it took me 1 year, just for the record, before I was monetized in 2020. I couldn't get 1,000 subscribers no matter what, but I got the watch hours. Anyway, that's a YouTube thing you don't want to know about. But I went here 3 years, I guess my point is, on my Social Security and never wanted for anything. Okay, and then the fatal time of March 2020 hit, and we all know what happened. We had the pandemic. The Philippines shut down its borders. It was like Hotel California in reverse. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Well, you could check out anytime you like, but you can never come back until they opened it again. And there was, out of the, I'll say at that point in time, 2,000 expats here, way dwindled back down to about the 1,000 number. Guys had to go home, sometimes because their visas had ran out and there was no way to get it extended. We were quarantined, we were masked, we had all this hoopla, the same thing you guys had, wherever you were. Restaurants were shut down. There were certain days that we could leave the house and certain days we couldn't. And I was too old, I think, to go into a restaurant. So the fortunate thing was right about that time, just a few months before the pandemic, I had been seeing my girlfriend, Baby May, for about 6 months, and we had made the decision to go ahead and try cohabitation. So about 2 months before they shut the country down, I had, who's now my wife, Baby May, as a companion and a roommate, coexist as a man and woman. And so that was just sort of one of those lucky breaks, I suppose. But what happened for those years? It was 2 years that the borders were closed. They reopened them in February of 2022. Yeah, closed in March. So 1 month shy of 2 years, because in February of 2022, they reopened. But during that time, so many guys had to go home for health reasons, family reasons, business reasons, visa issues. Um, they ran out of money. Maybe they had problems. I mean, the reasons are endless. It doesn't really matter why they left. The point being is that they left and they went home or they went somewhere else, but they couldn't get back in. And so we stagnated for 2 years and we really didn't go anywhere or do anything. And what that did to the local population, and I'll address this for the guys that are trying to figure out what the difference is with the females these days, is it isolated everyone so much. Back then, prior to the pandemic, women would come into Dumaguete to get employment. They would come in from the province. You've heard about the provincial province girl, which is what my wife is. And then there's the city girl, bar girl, that's a little more experienced. And there's the whole points in between. So those females and males, for that matter, stopped coming in because, hey, they couldn't. They weren't allowed to. And then they came out with their vaccination program and mask mandates and this mandate and that thing and this time and that time. And it was just 2 years of hell. I don't think I'll take any argument from anybody there. So what those women did was they discovered the internet and they discovered dating sites and they discovered meeting men on an impersonal level, not one-on-one, not that flirtatious look at the mall. That didn't happen for 2 years. And a lot of them just got comfortable because guess what? They found out they could make a living being a long-distance girlfriend. And they would meet guys. Some of them met one and was sincere as hell with the guy. And another one would meet five and pretend to be sincere with all five of them. But they were getting remittances from the men. And why go work? Why go stand on your feet for 12 hours to make 300 pesos a day when you can stay home and talk to Joe Blow over in Cincinnati and he'll send you $200 a month or whatever the number was. So that dynamic got created during the pandemic. Now, in February, when the borders opened, it was still a pain in the ass to get in here with all the cards and checks and swabs and whatnot. Eventually that over with. But there was a bigger influx yet again of new expats and foreigners here into Dumaguete. Today, the census is showing that it stands at about 5,000 Americans here in Dumaguete. And that's certainly not an exact number. For those that tell me, oh, this place is filled with too many expats, I say, really? Because I like math. And the math says, compared to the local population of Dumaguete of locals to us expats, it's 3.3% of the total population are guys that look like me. And so that is still, I think, a very, very small number. However, between the pandemic and between the expats that have arrived, we're no longer turning anybody's head as we drive down the street. In fact, it almost feels like America when it comes to opening a door for somebody, female, for example, and they might say thank you, but they just wander off. In other words, there's just no big allure that I can see, and I'm a married guy, so I don't really care. But for those coming in, I just thought I would throw that out there, that right now, that dynamic, in my humble opinion, others may have a difference, just doesn't exist anymore. What I would call those magical days of being someone kind of special have come and gone. Prices have gone up at least 30%. What you could rent's not so terrible. What you could rent for $200 or $300 back in 17, you can now get for $400 or $500, something comparable. The good news is, in 2025, is that Dumaguete has, I won't say exploded, but it has gotten bigger. And there's much, much more variety when it comes to food choices. There's much, much more variety when it comes just to simple shopping. They are starting to expand and do road work and repair. Is it perfect? No. Is it still crowded? Is it still smoggy? Is it still congested? Depends. Depends on what day of the week it is and where you are. Today is Monday. If I go to downtown Dumaguete today by the open air market, I'm going to be in stop and go traffic. Now that sounds, oh wow, what a pain. The good news is I'm in stop and go traffic for about 15 minutes. And then we get past all that open air stuff and we get out more of an open road and it lightens up. And then we get into Sabulin and it backs up again. And then the next thing you know, you're at the airport. So that's on a Monday when everybody's coming back to work. If I want to avoid all that knucklehead stuff, me and the wife load up the car or the bike on Sunday and Saturday. On Saturday, the traffic is about 40% of what it normally is. 40% reduction of what it normally is, 60%. And on Sunday, I would cut it in half. There's 50% as many vehicles, cars and bikes on Sunday. That's usually everybody's day off. And they're recovering from, a Saturday night at Red Horse. So everybody's sleeping in. Cost of living. I am now spending $2,000 a month. I still live in the same house. The same house is cheap because she hasn't raised my rent in 3.5 years. If I was to move, I would probably have to kick that budget up to $2,200, $2,300 a month just to move into another abode. So my answer to the man's question is, knowing what I know now, would I move back to the Philippines? My answer, after weighing it out over 2 or 3 days, is still a yes. Because the two big things to me is the visa, the cost of living, and the English. I've tried it in other places. I felt that the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze to have better food. As I just expressed, Dumaguete has had a fair explosion of new restaurants with much better food, with much better choices. You're going to pay for them, but they're there. The services have improved. The bureaucracy out here is still hell. Let me be the first to tell you. It took me 5 days when I first got here to get a driver's license. And if I was to start all over today as a brand new guy, it would take me 5 days unless I paid, what I like to call an expediter to help me along the way and smooth things along. Don't expect to open a bank account when you first get here. That's another thing that hasn't changed. So my summary is this: not one shoe fits all. Do your due diligence, research, look into visas, look into safety. Good old Dumaguete has been rated one of the safest cities in the Philippines recently. I'm very proud of that. And I can tell you, I can look you in the blues right here, right now, tell you I've never felt threatened. I've never been robbed. I've never felt under duress. Never once, ever, since I've lived here. I don't go out at night anymore. I don't go out drinking with the girls anymore. I now stay home with my lovely wife. And she was also someone that kept me sane during the pandemic. So I feel totally blessed. I'm sure that if I moved here tomorrow as a new guy, there's no way I could duplicate what I've accomplished since I've been here. So I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture of Dumaguete. The pluses are better food, the infrastructure is improving, the traffic is still brutal, it's still cheap to live here. There's cheaper countries, there's more expensive countries. The choice is yours, my friend. I would not have met Baby May. That would have been my biggest regret of not pulling the trigger back in 2017. All right, crazy people. We'll see you next time.